wonderful day. This ground upon which we stand was the place to which our ancestors, our chiefs, our leadership brought us here. So in behalf of the people that brought us here, I welcome you to this place, to my alma mater, to a gathering that when we go out that door, I hope is going to result in each one of us carrying something good for our children and their children. We're also thinking about tomorrow.
The Cheyenne and Arapaho Tribes Department of Education sponsored this Educator Summit during the 2013-14 school year. Teachers, principals, and administrators gathered to understand and better serve the needs of Oklahoma Indian students. It began with a frank discussion of Indian education history.
Our ancestors and leaders were diplomats of the highest order to negotiate what they had to negotiate with a government that at that time was just absolutely exploding and implementing the concept of manifest destiny. We signed our first treaty with the government in Wyoming Territory in 1851, the Fort Laramie Treaty. We negotiated the last one in 1867, and that had an educational provision. Our chief signed that again and said that all our young people between the ages of 6 and 16, male and female alike, would attend school and get what was called a rudimentary English education. With a statement like that, you can probably assume that we were never expected to go to college or get a higher education. We were just expected to read, to write, and become second-class citizens.
My mother did go to boarding schools when she was younger. She went to many different boarding schools at a very young age because my grandmother wasn't around for her when she was growing up, and so that was her resort to get away from alcohol abuse and physical abuse from relatives and her father.
In this generation, compared to what it was back in my aunts, my mom and them's generation, it's a completely different mindset because you deal with a lot of kids treating you different because of the color of your skin. So it was good times for my aunt and them and the rest of my family members, but to me personally, it was unaccepted.
I had two older sisters that came to Concho boarding school. And as far as I know, they had good experiences out here.
My grandma, she's in her 80s, 70s, and boarding school was something that they didn't like. They were forced to not speak their language and have their long hair and be able to talk, you know, what they're normally doing. And so they didn't like it that much. I mean, it was to the point my great-grandparents told my grandparents it was hard to live as an Indian, that they need to just stop and live a white life.
She spoke of positive things, but she would also talk about how painful it was that her mother wasn't there to send her money, or how she wasn't able to go home on the holidays because she didn't have money.
But then my cousins, who are a little younger than me, they graduated at a boarding school, and they loved it. You get to meet natives from all over the world who come together and make lifelong friends.
I've heard stories from my grandma and my dad, both. My grandma's 93, so she goes way back, you know, and actually it's her parents that were some of the children who were taken off the reservation and put in boarding schools. And it's directly affected my grandma. You know, my grandma was raised up, you know, at that time without, you know, language, learning our culture, You know, she was completely taken away from everything.
My grandmother just talked about it wasn't really good or bad. She was always running away back home. I think that was mostly just because she missed her parents, or she didn't like being away from home.
Yes, my mother attended boarding schools. Vaguely, she'll talk about it. Bits and pieces I'll get out of her here and there. But she always called it Girls' Town. But she attended school here at Concho. What little bit she's been able to share, I can tell that it wasn't a good experience.
For my mom, it was a bad experience. She was not allowed to speak her language. They cut her hair off and they scrubbed her skin because they thought she was dirty.
One of the main things that sticks out to me is how they killed her Cheyenne language. She said she always spoke Cheyenne and responded, understood it up until the age of 5 when she was forced into schools. At which point they were punished for using their language. They would swat them with rulers, they'd stick them out in the hall with a pillow and make them sleep on the stairs, not let them eat. They would go to bed hungry. Those are just some of the things that I can recall her saying.
My dad would talk about, when he would talk about it, a lot of times he wouldn't say a whole lot about it if I had asked him those questions, was, he talked about being left-handed, and, being beat, his hands beat because he wasn't supposed to write with his left hand, and so from this day forward, well, he's deceased now, but he always wrote right-handed when he's not, he wasn't. So, it's stories like that, and really what we look at it as now is how their experiences directly affected all the way down through my generation to, now my daughter's generation, as to where we're trying to go back full circle. And it was my dad's generation. He decided when he became an adult that he was going to go back to our culture, went back to our language, went back to our teachings, so that by the time that we were raised, being brought, our child-rearing years, that we were brought into the culture, we were completely traditional. Where we went through ceremonies, we went through sweat, we went through all of this, which wasn't a part of my grandma's life because my grandma was not allowed to participate.
We have the largest Native population in the whole United States in Oklahoma. Over 130,000, that's Native students in the public school. 39 tribes, more tribes than anybody in the United States in one state. We also have the largest number of Title VII programs in the country and the third largest number of Johnson O'Malley programs. So we bring a lot of money to the state to the education of our Indian children. We do fall down in some areas, but I think probably across the board, we fall down in some areas with all the students. With Indian students, they're just unique and special. And the reason why I say that is as an Indian person, I know our history and our culture and our background, is that we are attempting to meet the educational needs of our children, but it's just, we learn just a little bit different. A lot of people might not think that, but as an Indian educator, I do know that.
One thing that we spend a lot of time talking about in the Department of Education is learning from your experiences. So anytime that we can engage students in an activity that they might not be doing at home, just to see how somebody else might do this or to hear another person's point of view, I think that's really important. Anytime we're around somebody different, we're going to learn from them. And sometimes the way we think isn't the only way to think. We need to realize that there's another point of view there.
Well, I attended public school until after my freshman year, and it was pretty awful. The teachers really didn't try to get too involved with the students. Well, the Native students at my school, we were invisible. I remember just not really getting a lot of help with homework and just being passed on grade to grade without really understanding what I was supposed to have learned. I didn't feel like they took an interest in me or wanted to help me.
My father's Native American, And I was in elementary school, and he had to go to an event with me because my mother was working. And he was so upset about how the school treated him and me that he didn't ever go to anything ever again. And I didn't understand at the time because I was in elementary school, but it was because they treated him different because he was Indian and the school was all white school.
It was about 50% Cheyenne and 50% white in our classrooms. And sometimes it would be 75% Cheyenne and 25% white. And I had really good teachers and my classmates, and we participated in all parts of the school, like basketball and cheerleading, coronations, all that. We participated as well as the white kids did.
Now with the teachers, I could probably say there was maybe 2 that I felt like a real connection with, and I had a good experience. I'm not saying that it was a horrible experience or anything. I did feel though that coming from the reservation public school and going into the off-reservation public school, that I was a few steps behind, and it took me, a little bit to catch up. And once I caught up, I mean, it was no problem. Like academically, I was, completely fine.
I had a pretty good experience. I was active. I participated in band. I played sports, basketball, track, softball. And for the most part, we were treated fairly. I can remember the tribe being there to make sure that we had school clothes, and they'd buy us basketball shoes every year. That would always give me great joy when every single year we'd get brand new basketball shoes and some of these other kids were still, wearing the last season's. That always gave me great pride.
I had issues with my basketball coach that because I was Native American, she didn't want to play me on the court. I was really good at basketball and can shoot a three-pointer from the half line, but I still wasn't good enough for her.
I wasn't raised perfect, but you know what? I overcome those barriers. I mean, being Native American, I was the first girl to play football for Weatherford High School. That's probably one of the proudest moments of my life. I may not have a big plaque or a big picture on the wall, but you know what? To me, I did that. I crossed those lines.
And then there were moments when we were frowned upon and we were looked down on and we weren't good enough. We were those drunk Indian kids. Our families were drunks. And even that, if that wasn't even the case, that's how we were treated often.
Maybe there was some discrimination. I don't really remember that part. I remember good times when I was growing up at that school. When I moved to another school, it was different. I went to Clinton High School for a little while, and I didn't like it.
Discrimination was high in the public school, which was Weatherford. Considering there was a group of us who we all stuck together, we kind of found our way through the school together. We didn't let ourselves get set back by the teachers.
It is real. It does happen. It's still happening today. I think people just don't want to face the reality that there is racism today.
Educators were encouraged to share their experiences and insights into teaching Native students with other attendees. The small groups were then asked to compile lists of challenges and solutions.
That's their nature. That's their family's nature, is that they're not confrontational. I mean, at all. In the classroom, on the basketball court. I mean, I coached kids and we played teams and had some kids, some ethnic groups that we played against, some minorities that were extremely confrontational during games, but the Native American kids were not at all.
The Land Run Day was one day that the children they couldn't understand because they had to dress up as pilgrims. My daughter dressed up as Native American, and she didn't get recognized. She didn't get in no school pictures. She didn't get any better grade than the other. She was just different.
You have to be a person that understands their background, what they go through, what they've been through, whether it's the historical things or just present day things.
You know, we've got families that are having some turmoils and stuff like that, and it's like, how do you balance everything out so that child has a chance to have a future and to succeed? I don't think there's an easy answer to that at all.
Well, and I think the first step is just recognizing and acknowledging the family. I mean, that's a lot more than has been done in the past.
Key portions of the group's lists were then presented to the entire conference.
Talking about shyness and timidness, and say, is it the children that they're really lacking self-esteem, or that they're not motivated, or is it just that they're shy and timid because of maybe cultural norms in their community, as far as maybe it's respectful to be quiet and listen to your elders talk, or maybe you don't have to be number one. That was something that he brought up that I really liked, that Native Americans aren't seeking the accolades because individualism is not the paramount issue in tribal communities. It's more of a community effort than an individualistic effort.
Equal workload across the board, treat every student with fairness.
Oftentimes, it's easy for a teacher to not necessarily dismiss, but more or less kind of overlook someone who's not an issue as far as discipline. If they're quiet, if they're timid, that's not oftentimes in a teacher looked upon as a negative thing, because there are oftentimes so many kids who are raising Cain in the classroom and takes away from the lesson that's being taught.
One of them also brought up that they were impacted by the amount of encouragement by you all, the administrators, of showing up here and willing to work with us, willing to work with the tribes, and having a better life and better education for our students.
Some of the things we discussed was that assimilation is still present in our school system. Racism, prejudice, not necessarily in a hatred form, but like in a covert way, is still very prevalent in our school systems today.
One of the classes that I teach, and I really, really enjoy it, it's called Foundations of Education, which is really the first class that students think that they want to be a teacher. And we expose them to, we have them go on some field trips and get some observation hours. And one of the first things that I ask them early on in the class, I always like to ask them a true-false question, that in a few years, when you have your own classroom, you should treat every student the same. And the majority of the kids raise their hand and say, yeah, that's true, I do think we should treat them all the same. And because they're concerned, thinking that I want to find out if they're prejudiced, that they're going to treat people of color in a different way because of their color. But the answer to that question is no, you're not going to treat everybody the same. You're going to treat all of your students differently. Because your students are so different, we can't treat them the same. We want, the word that we search for when we talk about a relationship with a student is that we want to treat them fairly. We want to give every student exactly what they need in order to be successful. And so that came up today in my little presentation about the Cheyenne and Arapaho kids. There's no way that we should treat those kids just like we treat all of our other students. There's some special things going on in their life. When we talk about their culture, we talk about their home life, we talk about some of the struggles that they deal with on a daily basis. As a teacher, we have to recognize that. And so thinking about treating those kids differently, one of the different things that we want to do is bring them on campus. And we want to welcome them on campus, and we want to get more of them on our campus. But we never, ever want to treat all of our students the same.
I had 2 or 3 different girls come up the other day to me. In fact, it was just yesterday, and I was with our Indian Ed tutor, and she knew one of them. And we engaged in a conversation about a sweat lodge and if she knew anything about it. And it was a great conversation. And, you know, I thanked her so much for telling us about it. She forgot one thing, came back up to me, Mrs. Brower, you know, I forgot to tell you about this part too. And so she was excited to tell me and was excited that we were having that conversation. And that's what I want to be able to do with every student in my building.
I think that they've gotten better. I don't have any problems with the faculty members. They really work with me. Anything that I have going on, you know, I'm able to speak with them and talk to them and let them know what's going on. And from Rock Your Mocks Day, they allowed my daughter to wear her moccasins, and you know, 20 years ago, they probably would have made fun of me or, you know, told me to go home to change my shoes.
It's gotten a little better, I think, and I do have a good communication with my children's teachers. At least they know that I'm going to be involved, and I want to know if my kids are doing well as if they're making mistakes and, you know, getting in trouble for things. I am very vocal with my children's teachers.
I do pursue any kind of issues my children may be having in school. They do open up to me about their day and how their teachers are, because I've let them know that if they are having problems with any students or teachers, to let me know so I can go and talk to them.
It would be great to see them more physically involved in their school, like with their students and classes. I know testing and sending out paperwork is one thing, but to actually go and see and check on the classes and check on the students and talk to the children and, you know, just get a feel of their environment, I think would be very beneficial.
They should have more patience with our Cheyenne and Arapaho students, and they should understand that they kind of hang back. A lot of them don't go forward and ask for help, but they want help, they need help. But they just, so then they just kind of go through their years without getting the assistance that they really should be getting.
And I can remember telling the counselor one day, I said, you know what, it's not a matter if my daughter's going to college, it's a matter of where. And if you're not going to be that advocate, I will be her best advocate. Because I think that so many of them think that we're socially and economically challenged, that there's no opportunities for our children, so why bother? You know, they don't share that information with them, but yet they'll share it with the other children. You know, you're having to chase it down.
And I've asked the teachers on several occasions, you know, push my child the right way and teach them, make them be better and want to be better for themselves and, you know, for everybody else, because a good person all around is, you know, makes a better world.
A lot of times in these schools, and a lot of the teachers, maybe the administrators have no clue as to where these Indian children have come from. And like I said, it goes generations back. They're not lazy. They're not stupid, they're not dirty, they're not all drunks, you know, and I know not everybody thinks like that. But a lot of times, well, I'm not, you know, well, that Indian, you know, student isn't talking to me. Why aren't they talking to me?
They need to know our heritage and our cultures, everything from the symbolism of an owl to our students not looking the teachers in the eye. We had some students that had a low grade in art because they refused to draw or paint an owl. And of course they weren't going to backtalk the teacher, they just took the bad grade and went on to another project. But if they knew symbols like that, you know, maybe they could have been assigned something different and their grade would have stayed up. And also, the not looking a person in the eye, you know, usually your mother or your grandmother only tells you to look them in the eye if you're getting in trouble. Just small things like that. If they could understand our culture and our ways, you know, it would be a little bit easier for them to teach our Native American students.
You know, if we have people in these departments, if we have funding coming in specifically geared for American Indian children, we should have no worry then. I mean, we should be really 100% supporting these kids, following them from when they start kindergarten, pre-K, all the way up through until they graduate.
At Nance Elementary, they had their powwow exhibition for Native American Heritage Month, and that was a great turnout. The kids participated, the teachers participated, and to see everybody get up and dance and join in with the children, it was an awesome feeling. This is the same school that the teacher called me a dirty Indian and a pig, over 20 years ago, and then today they're joining in on a powwow exhibition. That was really awesome to see.
Diversity is not a deficit, it's something that we need to embrace, and we want our students and our teachers, our students that are going to be teachers, we want them to understand that they do need to recognize that those students are different and embrace those differences and expose all of our students to the differences that we have, whether it be cultural or economic or whatever it might be.
You know, being Oklahoma with 39 federally recognized tribes, and being Indian Territory when it first started, still the people of the state of Oklahoma, we still have some that don't know the true culture and the heritage of our Native people here. So anytime we can educate them or give them a peek into our culture and tradition, it's a great opportunity for them to learn our culture and our tradition, plus also understand where our students come from in the public school.
It's not that we're only going to teach the motivated kids, or we're only going to teach this certain said group, or we're only going to teach honors class. Those kids want to learn, so we're only going to teach them. We're there for all the kids, not just for a certain group of kids. And so that means, yes, the main point is we have to work harder. We have to work harder to reach those kids that maybe are not motivated and find out what will motivate them. You can't any longer sit there and sit back and say, well, I guess you got it, because we're moving on. You've got to make sure they all have it before you move on, for the good of that kid, for the good of the community, for the good of the school. I mean, it all has to go hand in hand if we want to make our community better, our state better, our kids better. You can no longer ignore a certain set of kids.